I'm Nicole Ellis for the PBS NewsHour, and I'm joined by my colleague and national correspondent John Yang as we continue our coverage of the Supreme Court confirmation of Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson. We just watched as senators voted 53 to 47 to confirm Judge Jackson to the Supreme Court of the United States. John, based on the votes, she is headed to the Supreme Court. What happens next? What are the next steps? And will she just start on the bench, or when will she take the bench?
Well, there's no opening on the bench yet. This is a little bit of an unprecedented situation, according to Supreme Court historians, in that she has a long wait. Justice Breyer says that he will step down once the current term ends, which would be the end of June or perhaps even early July if things run late. So she won't be able to even take the judicial oath until then. Because there's no spot for her. She could continue on the bench at the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia. I suspect that would not be likely because it could raise all sorts of problems or issues, because some of the cases that are before the Court of Appeals could eventually come up before the Supreme Court and would present a conflict for her. It's funny. I've been trying to find out what the plan is, what they anticipated, and the answer I got at every corner was, "Don't tempt fate." No one wanted to talk about it until this moment had happened, until she had been confirmed. So we're not quite sure what she'll do. She will have some time to make the transition. It's contrast to the last Supreme Court justice to be confirmed, Amy Coney Barrett. She was confirmed on October 26th, took the judicial oath on October 27th. That was a Tuesday. And the next Monday, she had oral arguments to prepare for. And among the oral arguments she heard in that first sitting, it was actually 2 weeks, the second week of that first sitting, was the case involving the Affordable Care Act. So she didn't have a lot of time to catch her breath. But presumably Judge Jackson, and she is Judge Jackson until she takes the judicial oath and becomes Justice Jackson, will have time to organize her chambers and hire clerks.
Initially, many people thought that Judge Jackson's confirmation would be by a very narrow and partisan vote. According to this final tally, that is not the case. Republican Senators Murkowski, Romney, and Collins broke with their party to vote yes for Jackson. So what's the difference between this confirmation vote and hearing and others?
I think this is pretty much in line with the confirmation votes that we've had the last several years, especially since the big change came in 2017 when the 60-vote filibuster was removed. The 60-vote hurdle to end a filibuster was removed from Supreme Court justices. That had been removed for other federal judges earlier, but then in 2017 removed for Supreme Court justices. We've had a series of narrow votes. This is, I think, a fairly narrow vote, and only 3 Republicans broke ranks. It is largely along party lines. And of those 3 Republicans, I think sort of the most interesting of the 3 is Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska. She is facing a tough re-election battle, pressed from the right by a candidate who is endorsed by Donald Trump. But remember, this is a candidate who in her last re-election lost her party primary to a Tea Party candidate and won a write-in campaign with a name Murkowski, not an easy name to spell and write in correctly. And I think that gives a candidate a certain amount of confidence, having done that, having bucked the party system and won as an independent on a write-in campaign. And also, for the first time in Alaska, there's some new election laws. Instead of a party primary, there's going to be what they call a jungle primary. All candidates of all parties appear on the ballot, and the top 4 go into the general election. And in that general election, they're ranked by preference. Voters declare a preference, like the New York City mayor's race we just saw. So that puts an emphasis on appealing to the center rather than appealing to the extremes to win, to fend off a primary challenge from the right, from the extreme, either the right or the left, or depending on your party. So I think that gave her some extra confidence or extra impetus to support Judge Jackson. And of course, Senator Murkowski is known to be a centrist who has bucked her party. And don't forget, she declared against Brett Kavanaugh in his confirmation. She did not end up voting against him because she what's called paired her vote. Senator Dennis had to be absent that day because of a family emergency, and so she said she would not vote. Dennis would have voted yes. She would not vote to offset that, so that there would not be a sort of an unfair advantage. But said that if she had voted, she would have voted no.
Let's talk about that issue of partisanship. You know, it is, as you said, still somewhat narrow, but noticeable for Republicans to break with their party to vote yes for Jackson. How does that compare to some of the most recent confirmations, specifically Justice Amy Coney Barrett and I'm forgetting his name right now, excuse me, but Brett Kavanaugh, with Justice Kavanaugh. How is this different from those hearings and confirmations in terms of partisanship?
Well, I think it has become the Supreme Court. It used to be that the Supreme Court nominations were not terribly partisan. I mean, you can go back to it was as recent as Anthony Kennedy in 1987, or as recent as it feels recent to me. Anthony Kennedy in 1987, he was approved on unanimously on a 97-0 vote. And even then, the year before, Antonin Scalia, who was a hero to the right and a villain to the left during his years on the Supreme Court, he was confirmed by a unanimous vote. It really has become sort of more recent that this has become very partisan. You talk about Amy Coney Barrett. Only one Republican voted. Amy Coney Barrett got no Democratic votes, and Senator Collins, a Republican of Maine who voted today for Judge Jackson, voted against Amy Coney Brown because she said it was too close to the election. She's made clear that her vote no was not a review or an opinion on her ability or credentials to be a Supreme Court justice, but she voted against him. In 2018, Brett Kavanaugh, those contentious confirmation hearings, they were sort of loaded with the charges of sexual impropriety when he was in high school. Only one Democrat voted for him, Joe Manchin. And as I say, that only one Republican, Senator Murkowski, said she would have voted against him if she hadn't refrained from voting out of respect for Senator Dennis.
Were there any standout moments from what we saw today and leading up to this moment?
Well, today, I think the drama was pretty much gone on Monday when Senator Murkowski and Senator Romney announced that they were going to vote for her, which I think there would have been it would have been dramatic, and it would have been sort of the first if she had been confirmed with the vice president, the president of the Senate, casting the tie-breaking vote. But the speeches leading up to this vote today were pretty desultory, I thought. I mean, pretty sort of pro forma. But I thought that the confirmation hearing, obviously, with the constant questioning of the Republicans on her sentencing decisions in child pornography cases, some of her other decisions on the district court and U.S. District Court, the sort of connecting her with critical race theory by Senator Cruz and Senator Blackburn. And I thought that sort of sort of, in a way, we've seen these hearings become more and more political as time goes on, and I thought this sort of set a new bar for that, as things that really didn't have a lot to do with Judge Jackson, but had perhaps more to do with the presidential ambitions of some of the senators who were asking the questions.
That's a great point. I'm really curious to hear about some of the context or the motivations behind, some of those issues that were brought up, whether it's critical race theory or her record in sentencing. Let's go back to the child pornography piece specifically. What is the bigger picture in terms of context, despite what we heard a lot of Republican senators consistently repeat both today and in the interviews with Judge Jackson prior to this?
Well, it's an interesting case. It's an interesting issue because I think that there are a lot of issues, sort of a lot of cross currents on that issue. It has to do with federal sentencing guidelines, which are, some may say, are outdated, especially when it comes to pornography cases, because there's a certain guidelines and suggested sentences for someone who's convicted of having X number of images versus X plus 10 images. But in the day of computers and internet, it's easier, as it were, to collect and download a large number of images, so that there's a lot of debate over whether some of those guidelines should be changed. And the fact is that her sentences are not out of the norm. They were lower than the federal sentencing guidelines recommended. But as I say, that there's a lot of controversy about those recommendations. And indeed, Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri was among those who led the charge on that, and a federal judge whom he sponsored and backed and suggested for the job, whose office he suggested for the job, also fell below the federal sentencing guidelines in Missouri. But the other issues about critical race theory, about transgender athletes, I think are all sort of Republican hot button issues in the culture wars right now that I think that those senators were playing to. There's really nothing I shouldn't say nothing, because certainly there could be cases that come up, but there's not a lot of light to be shed on a judge's judicial philosophy by asking about critical race theory or whether transgender athletes should compete in the NCAAs.
There's also the nuance of Senator Graham voting yes for her federal appointment and voting no for her Supreme Court appointment. What is the reasoning behind that?
Well, I think if you watch the hearings, I think that it was pretty clear that he's still pretty sore over what happened to Brett Kavanaugh at his confirmation hearings when Senator Graham was chairman. The sort of the late development of this letter accusing Kavanaugh of sexual impropriety in high school. It was a letter that had been sent to Dianne Feinstein, who was the ranking Democrat. She felt that she couldn't disclose it because of confidentiality with the letter writer, but it leaked late into the process, and so the whole thing had to be sort of the whole thing got blown up and restarted, and FBI interviews were conducted. I think I also think that Graham made a big deal about sort of the child pornography cases, because he has supported until today, has supported every Supreme Court justice who came before him, both in committee and in the full Senate. And he also famously said that, yes, he had voted for justices whose judicial philosophy he disagreed with, but he thought that the president of the opposite party had the privilege or had the right to nominate that nominee, and the right to get that nominee confirmed as long as they were otherwise qualified to be a Supreme Court justice. So for him to break that streak and to go sort of to flip, as it were, that this idea that that elections have consequences, I think he was sort of drawing a bright line to sort of justify that change.
Something else we heard a lot about is the lengthy sentencing, not only sentencing, but basically her lengthy decisions that Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson is known for. So I'm curious to hear, are there any cases that are coming up in the next term that you are interested in seeing her opinions on?
Well, I think the most interesting case, or the most consequential case, is affirmative action. There are two cases brought by Asian American students against Harvard and the University of North Carolina, arguing that they have been discriminated against by those two schools' affirmative action policies. That many more Asian American students would have been admitted if those schools had not tried to make their student bodies look like the rest of the country. The wrinkle in this is that Judge Jackson is a member of the Board of Overseers at Harvard, which is the alumni board that sort of the oversees, that sort of watches over and advises Harvard on its future. So in the confirmation hearing, she said she would recuse herself. She intended to recuse herself and not participate in that case. Now, right now, the Harvard case and the University of North Carolina cases are consolidated, meaning there would be a single argument and a single decision for those two cases. It could be that the court will decide to separate them again, so that they'll be argued separately, so that Judge Jackson could participate in the University of North Carolina case, but not in the Harvard case.
As we both just saw, Vice President Harris came to the podium, and upon announcing this confirmation, there was a round of applause. I'm curious to hear, what is the historic significance of this moment, specifically as the first Black woman to be confirmed for the Supreme Court?
I think you've said it right there. I mean, there of the 100, I can't remember what it is, 115, 117 previous nominees and previous justices to the Supreme Court, none has been a Black woman. I think that this is we've had the other sort of milestones: the first African American, the first Black justice, Thurgood Marshall, the first woman on the court, Sandra Day O'Connor, the first Hispanic on the court, Justice Sotomayor. You had the first Jewish member of the court in the 30s, Justice Brandeis, and I think this is just the latest step in the story of America, sort of opening up, shattering barriers, shattering ceilings, breaking barriers to people. I mean, she's going to bring. When the doors close and the justices have their weekly conferences, she's going to bring a unique set of experiences, of perspectives to that table when the justices discuss these cases. She knows the criminal system because she was a public defender in the federal public defender's office here in Washington. She can bring the history of her family, her parents who went to segregated schools in Jim Crow, Florida. No other justice can talk about that in a way she can. So I think there are all sorts of unique sets of experiences and viewpoints she can bring to the table. She's not going to change the court immediately, because I don't think that her viewpoint or her judicial philosophy is all that different from Justice Breyer's, the person she's replacing. But she's 51 years old. She's conceivably will be on this court for decades to come, and we don't know yet the impact, the imprint she's going to have on the Supreme Court into the future.
national correspondent for the PBS NewsHour, John Yang. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
I'm Nicole Ellis for the PBS NewsHour. Thank you for joining us. This concludes our coverage of Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson's confirmation hearings. But stick around and be sure to subscribe to us on all of our platforms. We'll see you again soon. Thanks for tuning in.